Tim Tebow and Jeremy Lin are very different people with very different stories. Tebow grew up in Florida and grew into a 6'3", 240-pound beast of a man who had everything you look for in a star athlete. He was, quite literally, exceptional. His parents, who were Christian missionaries, chose to homeschool Tebow rather than send him to the local public school, but despite that, he was still allowed by a 1996 Florida law to compete for them. And through that loophole, Tebow blossomed into one of the top recruits in the country for the class of 2006, and eventually one of the best players in the history of college football and a first-round pick in the NFL draft. Jeremy Lin, on the other hand, was absolutely not a blue-chip prospect. Lin is exceptional in his own right, becoming the first Asian American to win an NBA title in 2019, but his road to the league, which ran through Harvard and then the D-League and even playing in China, looked very different to Tebow's. And yet, through a series of circumstances that could never have been planned or expected and will almost certainly never be repeated, these two men would have their destinies linked by a 3 or 4 month stretch that would change the world of sports pretty fundamentally forever. Like I mentioned earlier, the Broncos drafted Tim Tebow 25th overall in the 2010 NFL Draft, after trading their 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round picks that year to the Baltimore Ravens. And even at the time, this was a very, very divisive pick. Tebow's actual draft value split opinion for months in the build-up to the draft itself, with some believing that Tebow's athleticism and competitiveness would make up for his technical deficiencies, while a lot of others thought that they, wouldn't. But the Broncos' brain trust believed that Tebow was worth the risk, especially under the tutelage of the guy who had worked with Tom Brady and with 2 veteran quarterbacks ahead of him. And if you kind of squint a little bit, you can see the logic. Tebow had that lightning in a bottle quality that is always going to be valuable to NFL teams, but unfortunately for everyone involved, that was about all he had. After Kyle Orton and the Broncos struggled mightily in 2010, which led to Josh McDaniels getting fired before the season even ended, Tebow was called on to start the last 3 games of his rookie year. It was what the fans had been asking for all season, but when they got what they wished for and Tebow actually got onto the field, things didn't get much better. Tebow was back on the bench at the start of 2011, watching Orton once again derp the Broncos into a 1-4 record to begin the season. And whether John Fox just decided he didn't have anything to lose, or he legitimately believed Tebow could make a difference, the young quarterback was thrown into a game against the Chargers in October, at which point something happened. This is where the legend of Tim Tebow in the NFL really begins, because as soon as he got on the field, the Broncos, somehow, started to turn it around. They nearly came back and erased a 26-10 deficit that week, but in Miami 7 days later, the Broncos scored 18 unanswered points in the 4th quarter and overtime to beat the Dolphins in absolutely ridiculous fashion. And out of nowhere, even though a lot of his stat lines looked absolutely horrifying, Tim Tebow and the Broncos kept on winning. It wasn't pretty, but between Denver's excellent defense and Tebow's ability to suddenly become good in the 4th quarter, the Broncos, who I feel like I should remind you went 4-12 the year before, made the playoffs in 2011. And the internet lost its freaking mind. The Giants beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl for the 2nd time in 5 seasons. Drew Brees broke the single-season passing yards record. Devin Hester scored the most punt return touchdowns in the history of the NFL. All of these things happened in 2011, and yet, the biggest story of the entire year was an objectively bad quarterback on a team that didn't even finish with a winning record. Tebow Mania was bigger than what was happening on the field. Mostly because it had to be, because what was happening on the field most weeks was genuinely miserable to watch. People did watch, of course. The Broncos game against the Patriots, which they lost, was the highest rated game of the entire regular season. But the amount of coverage that Tebow was getting nationally grossly misrepresented how well he was actually playing. My guy had a total QBR of 38.6, the 6th lowest in the entire NFL, but it was still Tebow on the cover of Sports Illustrated and leading every episode of SportsCenter. Tebow time came to a very abrupt and unceremonious end when they played the Patriots in the divisional round, and he would get traded that offseason. But the effects of everything that happened for those few weeks would be felt for a lot longer. Meanwhile, about 1,800 miles to the east, the New York Knicks were having pretty similar issues. With a core led by Carmelo Anthony and Amari Stoudemire, as well as the newly acquired Tyson Chandler, the Knicks looked ready to contend. There was only one problem. They didn't have anyone to play point guard in Mike D'Antoni's system. It wasn't for lack of trying. The Knicks had signed Mike Bibby and Baron Davis that offseason, but both of them were well past their prime by that point. and Chauncey Billups, who'd been the team's point guard the year before, had been waived so they could sign Chandler. When Carmelo went down with an injury in early February, the Knicks were under 500 and desperately in need of someone to come through for them if they wanted to salvage their season. Enter the undrafted second-year point guard out of Harvard, who'd started that season as the fourth choice on the Knicks depth chart. On February 4th, Tebow Lin got to play pretty much the whole game against the Nets, and immediately provided the spark that the Knicks had been looking for. In 36 minutes, Lin went for 25, 7, and 5, all career highs, and more importantly, helped stop a run that had seen the Knicks lose 11 out of their last 13 games. With Lin as their starting point guard, the Knicks won their next 7 in a row, including a game against Kobe's Lakers, with Lin averaging 24, 9, and 4 over that stretch. This period, which was unfortunately cut short by injury a few weeks later, was affectionately referred to as Linsanity, and all at once helped rescue the Knicks' season and launch Tebow Lin's decade-long career in the NBA. Like Tebow had done a few months earlier, Lin stepped into a hopeless-looking situation and pretty much single-handedly turned it into the exact opposite of that. And also like Tebow, he became the biggest story in sports for as long as the Magic lasted. These two men had different backgrounds, different skill sets, and even played different sports, but their big moments were really similar, and they happened within just a few months of each other. And that's no coincidence, but it's worth taking a second to ask, why was either one a big deal in the first place? Teams get hot and players have really impressive games all the time, but no one is making a feature-length documentary about them or signing them to minor league baseball contracts. The first reason this happened is something we've talked about quite a bit on this channel, which is prediction error. If Trevor Lawrence suddenly becomes a perennial Pro Bowler in the next couple of seasons, no one is going to freak out about that. He was the first overall pick, but these guys were backups. No one expected Tim Tebow to lead the Broncos to the playoffs, or Tebow Lin to suddenly become the most exciting player in the NBA, but they did, and the emotional payoff was greater in both cases because of that difference. But I said that these two guys changed sports, capital S sports, forever, and I fully believe that, but not because they were a good story, or even because they were great athletes at all. There was something else that was happening around this time that turbocharged this entire thing, and that's this. This is a chart of active Twitter users between 2010 and 2019, which you might notice a pretty aggressive increase at the beginning of. The events in question happened between October 2011 and February 2012, at which point Twitter was right in the middle of absolutely exploding. According to a report by the Mercury News, Tim Tebow's game-winning touchdown pass in the first round of the playoffs was the most tweeted about event in the history of Twitter at that point, at over 9,000 tweets per second, surpassing the previous record, which was set by Beyoncé announcing that she was pregnant at the MTV Music Awards. And if you're pulling in bigger numbers than Beyoncé, that probably means you're onto something really important. And it's worth taking a second to figure out why. What makes an event go viral? A Harvard Business Review article from 2015 lays out a few different reasons for why people choose to do things like share posts and talk about things with their friends, starting with social motivation. Tim Tebow and Tebow Lin both have extremely strong social appeal to certain very large groups. Tebow to the evangelical Christian community, and Lin to the Asian American community. In addition to their team's very large fan bases, these two men had built-in social megaphones that were incredibly eager to celebrate their exploits on the internet. They were more than just athletes. They were ambassadors, giving the people watching them something to identify with in a way that they might not have before. And that identification created a positive emotional response, which is another really important factor in making a post go viral. Knicks and Broncos fans were really frustrated before, but with Tebow and Lin, they finally had something to get excited about. It also helps a lot to have some of what that article calls super sharers, or a group of people who either share a lot of information on the internet or have the capacity to share information with lots of people at once, like Shaq, or Conan O'Brien, or Steve Nash. If the right people are sharing something, the content of the message may not even matter that much. But the timing of when it comes out does matter, and on that point, Tebow time and Linsanity could not have happened at a more Twitter-friendly moment. 2011 was kind of the first time that real news was being broken on the platform, or that major events were being live tweeted. The landscape of Twitter was changing from kind of a niche microblogging site to a legitimate global information hub, and right into the middle of that change came two athletes who had remarkable, newsworthy stories. What's crazy about this is that in the big picture, Tebow was out of the league within like 18 months of that 2011 season, and Lin's Knicks lost in the first round to LeBron's Heat while he sat on the bench injured. Neither one of these guys made an all-star team or will get within shouting distance of the Hall of Fame, but they do have a legitimate claim to being two of the first viral sports stars in the world. I made a video a while back about Victor Wembanyama, who is now a household name in this country despite being a 19-year-old playing in France. His talent would have gotten the attention of NBA scouting departments regardless, but social media's fascination with him has taken this guy's star to the next level. NFL quarterbacks like Gardner Minshew and Bailey Zappi have gone on similar journeys to Tebow's, stepping up from their roles as backups to overperform in a way that the internet can't get enough of. All of these are echoes of what happened between the fall of 2011 and the spring of 2012, when Twitter was emerging into a global powerhouse, and Tim Tebow and Jeremy Lin were emerging right along with it. These two guys were in the right place at the right time, both to lead their teams in unexpected ways and to be swept up by the social media wave that was just beginning to wash over the entire world. You can debate whether or not they earned it or if they were worth all the attention they got as players, but one thing you can't deny is that Tim Tebow and Jeremy Lin were sports icons for as long as their time in the sun lasted. The psychology of becoming a viral sensation is multifaceted, but there are a few key commonalities. You need a strong social connection with a group of people, an emotional tie-in to motivate those people to act, and a big enough platform to reach as large an audience as possible. These guys had all three of those things in abundance, and even though many have come after them that have benefited from the same formula, no one will ever be able to truly replicate the meteoric, controversial rise of Tebow Mania or the joyous, intoxicating wonder of Linsanity. They just can't. Hi everybody, my name's Will, and I want to take this time to thank you for watching my video. This is my channel, Student of the Game, where we talk about sports psychology and culture. If you like the video, feel free to give it a like or subscribe to the channel for more stuff like it. Don't know about y'all, but putting this video together gave me a lot of the nostalgia feels. Such a fun and chaotic time in sports history, and even though I included as much stuff about Linsanity and Tebow time as I could, I had to cut a bunch more for time's sake. There's a ton of good content on this site about them though, if you want to go and relive the actual games themselves. But for our purposes, that's all I've got for you. We hope to see you back here next time for another episode. Bye!